Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Digital Dentistry Decoded, the podcast all about digital dentistry, keeping you in the know. Now, over the past few episodes, we've had some amazing CEOs from all sorts of digital dentistry companies, and today we are joined by another one, Ayush Bagla. How are you doing, Ayush?
I'm doing great, Ahmad. Good to be back here again after a while.
Yeah, man, it was nice to have you on season one, and now we're back on season two, and we can see you now, which is good. For those of you who didn't see season one, Ayush is the founder and CEO of Ackuretta. This is a very popular line of chairside 3D printers, and I think they were one of the really popular printers to come on the market and offer, a whole workflow. Their Curie light cures are super popular, and they were one of the ones that were really pioneering this entire workflow, but also having an open platform. And yeah, please take it away, my friend. How have you been?
Oh, it's been an interesting year. A lot of new developments, equipment, machines, software, post-processing devices, and overall solutions. And we see digital dentistry even changing now with the scanners. A lot of developments there. A lot of big releases just last month in September.
Yeah.
And I look forward to seeing more on the AI and material chemistry side in the coming year.
Before we get into that, because you're totally right, my friend, and I can't wait to pick your brain. I'm sure a lot of people want to know what's been going on. What are you thinking? How's Ackuretta been? I mean, is everything all good? You guys have the last release was the Sol Plus. How's everything been in business? I understand it's been quite a testing year for 3D printing.
Yeah, well said. It's been a testing year for 3D print. It's across the board. We have data on these things. So, yes, while the market has been showing signs of weakness, there's a lot of geopolitical factors for it. This war brewing in the Middle East, Russia and Ukraine doesn't help. Europe is undergoing a recession in certain areas. Australia and New Zealand, since you're from that part of the world, you've seen the economy is not as strong as it used to be. And US has the elections coming. So with all that, combined, it's we knew that it's not going to be the best year in terms of numbers. But I think it's been a very good year in terms of developments and, the new releases from different companies to take the industry to the next step.
It certainly has been interesting. Yeah, I mean, especially with some of the releases, obviously printing side, Midas was a big release this year. I'm really curious to hear your opinion on that. But also, I think it's been this whole shift to everything on the cloud. What are your thoughts? I mean, obviously, Prime Scan 2, scanning on the cloud, and we had the Itera Design Suite, designing on the cloud. Do you think this is the next wave that's just going to take over everything?
Most certainly, all these are contributing factors because we see that the simpler the process for the user to get to production, the less the problems. And most of the skill is required in the design and in the process to get from scan to print or scan to mill. So anything to reduce or create efficiencies in those processes will always be a home run.
100%. And also, like, just looking at the market, it's quite interesting to see quite a bit of consolidation going on. Do you think, this was a question I asked Rooney from 3Shake, especially on the scanning side, there's over 35 different scanners. I think it makes my job really hard reviewing them all, but I also thought, like a small market. Do you think the same thing's going to happen with 3D printing?
The same thing's already happened with 3D printing because there was a lot of companies, traditional dental companies that have left the arena, I would say. Planmeca is a good example. Coolzer is another example. Bego is another example. Vipmix is another example. So, those are big names with global presence, and they're not in this race anymore.
Just because some people may be confused, because a lot of these companies still produce resins. Do you mean by on the hardware front they've exited?
Yes, specifically on the hardware front, and some on the material front, their systems and solutions would be weaker because now they've downgraded from a solution company back to a product company, while other companies have upgraded from a product company to a solution and then moving towards workflows and applications.
So it's really interesting you say that, and it's definitely something we're seeing in the industry, and something that I hear a lot of companies are trying to pivot exactly like you say. Rather than offering a product, it's all about a solution now. A whole workflow. What can I do? And a good example of that is the Midas. I'm curious. I can't hold it. What do you think? Do you think this is the future? Do you think for 3D printing and dentistry, especially chairside, it's more of these application focused printers?
Yes and no, I would say. I think that, yes, Midas is a fantastic concept, fantastic engineering, and it's something different. And, we haven't seen something like that in the prosumer market for all the years that I've been in the print industry. So, from that sense, completely disruptive. However, when we actually talk to a lot of users, because our business is in 80 countries, and when we talk to the users and we see their buying appetite, if they're to pay $10,000, $15,000 just for one or two applications, this is a significant investment. And yes, we can always ration and say a mill is $100,000, but today in most parts of the world, it's difficult to get a user to even buy a regular printer for that $10,000, even though they know they're going to get the ROI out of it. And if you double that suddenly or triple that as a whole package, then we're talking a lot of money. In many parts of the world, you could open a clinic for that kind of investment, and the dentist would then think, should I open another clinic, which is a revenue stream, or buy a piece of equipment that gives me some efficiencies?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because it's a totally different based on the country or region of the world you look at. And obviously, SprintRay has been really hitting the American market hard. And I guess for them, when you compare it to the Middle East or India or countries like that, and these are all fast growing countries in digital dentistry. I'm sure you see the data. You're right. I mean, the buying power is significantly different versus getting a full package printer. So is there any other interesting things in the industry you've been seeing?
Yeah. What I saw this year in the print industry, which was interesting, is the introduction of a stain and glaze. We realized that most of the users who picked up resins from us for temporary or these provisional resins that are out there, they were unable to get the results that they desired, primarily because they weren't able to get the aesthetics or the longevity. So even if we were propagating that, yes, you can use this long term, or, people like to believe in this word called permanent, which is highly questionable. Okay, you have a crown that's permanent or a prosthetic that's permanent, but then if the stain and glaze wears down, as a clinician, I think you would not consider that option for your patients.
100%. And you bring up a good point. I mean, a lot of these, I think post-processing is really missing in this entire picture for a lot of clinicians. Although it's talked about, it's kind of all over the show. Like, you got some techniques that are getting pushed, like candid coding and these sort of things. And I've done videos on those when that was a popular buzzword. But then it's funny because you get the printing company saying, hang on, guys, we don't approve of that. That is not a validated workflow. You guys shouldn't really be doing that. And I think it's very interesting, the market to me right now in 3D printing, because some companies like, we have a validated workflow. This is our strongest suit, blah, blah, blah. Everything's validated. But then at the same time, a lot of the post-processing is all over the shop. People are doing all sorts of things, using all sorts of different products. And I really don't think there's a consensus on how you even post-process a lot of these highly filled ceramic crowns properly. I mean, they say you should spray them now. And what are your thoughts about all of this?
Trust me, it's a minefield. We see this every day because, we, unlike a lot of print companies, we actually do virtual training and a virtual onboarding for a lot of our clients. More than 70% of our clients are served with these kind of knowledge services from our side. And the knowledge base is really low for most users, even if they're big names on social media or, they're using other sophisticated equipment. And we see that, yes, they definitely need to learn how to stain and glaze, what the validation looks like, how to get the best life out of the products. So that's really a miss. And I can't imagine what's there with the other users who are not even getting into 3D printing or who are just considering it. Their knowledge level is probably significantly lower.
Yeah, you're right. And you mentioned that you saw some exciting stuff on the staining and glazing front there. Can you share exactly what that was? Or is it like, Is it from you, or is it from a different company, or?
So I would say the company that was interesting in their development roadmap with stain and glaze was Pacten, because they came out with the stain and glaze kit and with the bond kit, and they launched something for auto flash, which is more of a bulb based solution. And all the LED boxes in the market currently are using LED, and there's only one player with auto flash that's using bulb, which is a fantastic box. So they've come out with something new. It's going to be announced very soon, and you will have the ability with an LED curing system to get a stain, a glaze, and a print. So basically, it's three in one. You could apply the stain and glaze on the printed part and then post cure it. So there's no additional post curing time, and it's a one-shot post cure.
Interesting. Which company did you say this is?
This one's Pacten from US.
Oh, yeah, of course.
The
Pacten.
roll-in materials.
Yeah, of course. They're super popular. Quite familiar. Yeah. What did you think of their stain and glaze kit anyway?
It's quite a good stain and glaze kit. However, we have some systems in-house that work on a bulb, not only auto flash, but a couple of other UV curing solutions. So we saw the capability and we saw the aesthetic potential. We found that quite impressive. I do believe one area for them and for other companies to work on is the longevity, because 100%. At the end of the day, these solutions need a bit more data to substantiate 5-year, 10-year lifespans.
Yeah. Do you have any idea on the longevity of these light cured staining glazes? I mean, I don't think it's something that's really talked about. Again, I just don't think it's around. The thing is, the industry is moving so fast, isn't that every 2 to 3 months there's a new technique. So we all forget the past technique, and no one's really following them up. And I don't know. I think anyone who's done staining and glazing like that on a printed denture back in the day, or a composite restoration, if you're not covering it with something pretty significant, like a thick layer of something, they come off pretty easily. Is that what you've been seeing as well?
Yes, we've noticed that for sure with the current solutions on the market. I do believe this new solution from Pacten will have a much longer life. The question is how much longer, and time will tell. But I definitely see that it would pass the 1-year mark.
Amazing. And Pacten's an amazing company. They do produce a lot of really cool resins. You have close ties with them, of course, and being able to use rodent and sculpture and all their amazing restorative resins, permanent, like we say, but at least strong for a printed resin. But, it's interesting to me because it seems like it's in the restorative space, which there's so much focus on 3D printing on restorative dentistry. I have 2 questions for you. In the restorative space, do you really see this as the kind of thing that moves the needle for dentists, not labs, but dentists to get into 3D printing? Do you think it's warranted, all this focus on printing crown and bridge?
I would say segment that into fixed prosthetics and removable prosthetics. So what we've noticed with our users is that the fixed prosthetic business is a bit of a question mark because of the aesthetic and the life. But the removable prosthetics, when you look at an all-on-4, a denture, or if you're doing a screw-retained crown, stuff like that, I see those as where 3D printing will move the needle, and it is moving the needle. We have print data from all our customers. There's been a 300% increase in the last 1 year of customers using restorative applications. Now, we don't know specifically which application, but there's a high uptake of restorative materials, where model is, of course, the most common, and splint used to be number 2, but now clearly, both by volume and by number of prints, the restorative materials have become a clear number 2.
Wow, that's incredible, man. That's surprising, because I always said, it's models first and then splints. So, yes. And restoratives are really pushing in a way. I like what you said. I really think the removables are a massive advantage. I love printing all on X, same day or the day after immediate temps. It's like the best thing ever. It's the coolest workflow once you get into it for those doing full arch implants. And dentures is also something that I think is really cool. Where do you see the design element fitting into all of this? Like, so dentists still don't do the CAD. Who is doing the CAD? Do you see dentists working with local labs, or are they outsourcing the CAD and then printing in house, or how's this all working? Because I personally I have a lab. I'm very fortunate with 6 technicians, and it's in the same site as my clinic. So I just go and talk to them and tell them, "Can you please make this for me?" But other clinicians, if you're telling me they're doing full arch restoratives and dentures, which are quite, I would say, difficult to design compared to a crown. Do you know how this works? Who's doing the design and all of this?
Very good question. So, what I would say is that 3D printing is still in its early days of adoption. So, only the top 5, maybe the top 10% of clinics are buying printers today. And many of these have had experiences with mills or a little bit more familiar with digital. So, a lot of these users are, maybe they have a technician in house, or they're tinkerers where they know how to do this, and they typically enjoy doing the design work themselves. Of course, there is a percentage of users who are outsourcing. I think Evident is doing extremely well. They paid us a visit last year. I spoke to them a couple of months ago. They were like, their headcount's gone up to 400, and they used to be at like 40 during COVID. So every year they've been adding 100 people, and with
Right.
their price point, they serve clinicians, not labs.
Yeah. Obviously, there's going to be that huge play in any entrepreneurial person out there listening. I think there's going to be a huge business move to offer these design labs globally, because I think as dentists all rush to go digital, the vast majority don't want to do CAD. That's super interesting. What about going back to the restorative thing, the restorative printing and crown and bridge printing? What are you seeing? To me, it's like 2 or 3 main players in the crown and bridge game in terms of resins. Obviously, SprintRay, they've been pushing that for a very long time, and they do a great job in the marketing and production of materials. And then you have PacDent. They also push very hard with their rodent materials. Who else? Who else do you see? Is there any up and coming one? To me, it's quite interesting. All the talk is those 2 companies. Also, maybe Bago with Trinique, the new one. Do you see any good up and coming material companies? I mean, we have over 250 printers, and it's kind of crazy to me that there's only like 2 or 3 or 4 main players that are talked about for resins.
Look, there's a lot of resin companies. So, if somebody visited our lab, they would see at least 500 different types of resins. It's more than the number of printers. There's more resins than printers. And everyone's got their own take on a permanent crown, or they call it a permanent crown or a definitive crown or long term. So it's highly interesting to see, okay, everyone's jumping onto this train. But as the industry has moved from products to solutions and now applications, who's really focusing on the application end of the business? And this is where SprintRay are shining. They have an edge over the others, because they're selling solutions from the start to the finish. Shining is a different solution because it starts from the scanner to the CAD to the print to the post processing, the materials, and the training. Because I think you were in Dubai a couple of months ago, and you saw that they're doing courses on all on fours and all on X's. So that's how they've changed the business model and the narrative. While a material company is just selling a bottle, it's difficult for them because they have no direct connection with the end user. It's difficult to do that because products go through distribution channel, and they may be using it on a very variety of different printers that they're not familiar with using and supporting. So I think that that's where material companies, you would find it hard for them to spend the dollars to make themselves known, because they're in the bottle business and it makes money over time. But initially, if you're just selling bottles, it's hard to pick up the volume. The mileage on these resins is really high. Like if you were doing crowns out of a 1 liter bottle, you could get 2,000 crowns out of it. A clinician would take a year to get 2,000 crowns out if you're lucky. You'd be really happy if you had 2,000 crowns in a year.
That'd be great. That'd be a good year.
Yes. I think those are the kind of bottlenecks that maybe people on the outside can't intuitively see. And the industry is slowly moving towards workflow, because users are buying the workflow, they're buying the application at the end. So whoever is able to market that and has the full suite portfolio for the application, I think their name will be more prominent, whether they have the marketing dollars or not.
Interesting you say that. And just goes back to what you said. I love how you put it. It's all application-based dentistry now.
Yes.
Rather than like a product. It's all about, what can I print? How do I print? And you see that all over social media as well. A lot of people say, what resin should I use to print X? And then everyone says this resin. And that's the end of that. It's all about people just want to know how to get from A to Z. That's it.
Pretty much. I think you will see more materials coming and more finishing techniques and more finishing products which are coming out to get the aesthetics up. And I think aesthetics is a big thing. Everyone's just been talking about strength. But, in mechanical properties, aesthetic is a part of mechanical properties. I think there's been lesser focus on aesthetics. And without the aesthetics, even if you have the strongest material, but it doesn't look up to the dental standard, then it's not going to work. And this is a good example with the splints in the past. It used to be yellow, it used to be blue. Now splints are coming out translucent or, quite transparent, like some of the latest stuff that I've seen. Like, it's impressive.
You're totally right, man. That's another thing that's kind of not talked about, is that these printed crowns are very monolithic. I mean,
Yes.
Anyone on Instagram and Facebook can make them look nice after, I don't know, a session, staining them and soft boxes to take photos, etc. But when dentists go and do it, just day-to-day dentists go and do it, they're going to realize, hang on, these look like, what we used to call dead-looking zirconia, generation 1 or 2 zirconia, These don't look that great. And it's okay after a while, I guess, if that's your standard, if you just want to tuck it back in a molar somewhere. But you do start questioning, why am I changing the way I do things if the previous way was better? And I think one big challenge to printing restoratives is, to me, one of the main advantages is milling machines are expensive. That's one of the main advantages of getting into printing restoratives. Let's say a crown or an inlay. But what if milling machines one day become really cheap? That'll be an interesting challenge for printing restorations, being able to just mill a restoration in 7-10 minutes versus printing a restoration in 7-10 minutes. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a question I've asked myself for a while. We have friends out at Roland, and they've been selling mills now, in at least in certain markets of the world, for about $18,000 retail.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a lot of money if you look at it compared to a printer. So, if you're to buy a package from one of these more premium print companies for 15, 20,000, and you had a mill for 18,000, a mill is a proven science and significantly easier to use, in the sense because it's so mature, it's so established. Margin for errors are so much lower. But the print, you can do more applications, and there's different kind of friction points that people could face, users will face over the process. So both serve a different need. I think that, if you look at the Chinese mills, there are a lot of Chinese mills which are selling for below $10,000. And you would still need the model, I guess, maybe not in all cases. So there's still a space for the printer there.
You bring up a few really good points I want to kind of dive into. You talked about friction for adoption, right? What are some of the barriers you're still seeing for people to get into 3D printing? Because everyone seems to talk about it. And I think it's hovering around Chairside, you probably have better data than me. I would say 10-15%. Would that be accurate, Chairside printing, or maybe a bit higher?
I wish it was higher. So a couple of countries where you see higher adoption would be in US or in Canada, maybe even in Australia. But most of the other countries, the adoption is low single digit. I think it has to do with knowledge and training. So there's so much that needs to be done, because printers are quite unique, because you can do 15 different types of applications on a printer. But with a milling machine, it's a few applications. So maybe from a training perspective, it's a little easier to train on that front. The real question is that if a user buys a printer and they buy it in the beginning for models, and later they want to transition to guides, they want to go into splints or restorative cases, this is over a progression of a year or 2 years. Which company, which distributor has this knowledge and is giving them that clinical handholding to be able to execute on those processes? So that is where I feel, and we clearly see, that users, like, they've been left to figure it out on their own, and they don't get as far as they could or they should.
Or they go to Facebook groups.
Yes, that's usually full of complaints.
And yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, let's say 10, 15 indications on a 3D printer. What do you see? The average user, how many indications do they do?
It's a good question. So I think at the clinical level, if you look at an average, I would say one per day. So as people get familiar with the applications and the products, it increases maybe to two or three. Labs, of course, are different. It depends on their case loading, but it's common for labs to do between 5 and 25 parts per day for the small or the medium sized labs. And they typically have multiple printers and they're doing a lot of different kinds of work.
And in the lab side, I think it's a much more mature market as well, printing at least. Much more penetrated, and they seem to know how to tinker with this stuff a lot better.
They do. They've been fiddling with it for like a decade, and I think technicians they like tinkering with things. So I would say it works well for them.
What's your thoughts on so with restorations? Are you guys coming up with anything exciting that you can share, or is it top secret?
Well, pointing out the aesthetics, as I was mentioning, we think that that's let's say the next frontier for 3D printing. So I can share maybe an image of what we believe is the future in terms of gradient and translucency with print. So this was directly printed out of a system, and you can see from the occlusal surface, the buccal surface, this different kinds of shading, and this is just out of the printer. There's no stain and glaze on it.
Monolithic resin
Solution.
that looks amazing, yeah.
Yes, it's years of work, and it's very interesting developments. And we see that if you start with something like what you've done in the zirconia days with single layer, and now you're moving that to multi-layer, at a clinician level, everything is about saving time, saving energy, saving skill, right? So we're like, okay, if you buy a printer from anybody with any resin, and the higher the filler load, the more amount of post-processing that would need to be done manually. That's a problem. So with this method, the post-processing is significantly reduced in terms of stain, glaze, and so on.
That's really cool, man. Thanks for sharing. I'm curious, do you think the strength is there? Are you at the level where you're happy? I remember last year, I think we talked, and you told me, there's a theoretical limit around 200 megapascals. That's just how it is. Are we going to break that, or that's it? That's resin.
No, I think we are going to go further. It depends on the apparatus of the system. So when I made that statement last year, the idea is that if you're using a generic 3D printer, and a good example would be like what Midas did with the cartridge. They use some amount of pressure, which is applied through a piston to kind of increase the density of what's being printed, and therefore you can use higher fillers. So these kind of techniques could be used, and this is why I mentioned it's a system approach. It's not a resin particularly. It's how the whole thing comes together to build that final application. And there's a lot on the post-processing side, because we've done a lot of tests. As you know, we released the nitrogen generator a couple of months ago. It's really a hot topic, and we've observed that we get much better aesthetics, much better mechanical properties on our restorative cases, if in our splint cases. So it's about finding those efficiencies through the whole process and not just depending everything on the resin. So whether that's the post-cure, whether it's the nitrogen, whether it's the printer itself with a new apparatus, a new concept. I'd say these 3-4, let's say, factors could help us get to that next level. But for a printed resin to reach Emax, this is maybe optimistic, too optimistic.
And then the second question comes, does it have to reach Emax, right? Like, it's funny because I was talking to Amir from SprintRay on the podcast, and I asked him, the language around printing restorations has seemed to change a bit, because first it was all about crowns, now it's all about inlays and onlays. Have you noticed that?
With certain companies, yes, I can say that we've noticed that. But yes, inlays and onlays are easier, crowns are more questionable. And let's say it's a low-hanging fruit. So they're trying to aim at that. But again, if a user has to go and design inlay and onlay, it's a different skill set. And there's just more processes around it.
100%. And again, it goes back to what you said, a solution, right? we're seeing, to go full circle back to what we talked about at the start, seems like everyone's is making some form of cloud design. Every company that's really into digital is investing quite heavily into dentists being able to design something on some form of platform, and that's typically going on the cloud. It's super interesting stuff.
Absolutely. And I'm curious to see what comes out with AI. There's a couple of companies that have made a lot of promises to us, and maybe IDS next year, we will see that next leap on the software side.
It's going to be a big year next year, that's for sure, especially AI, I think, and 3D printing. So do you think it will, be the solution to, take more market share from milling and milling restoratives? Do you think this is kind of where you see the industry going?
Not necessarily. I think that most of the work is still done by traditional methods rather than by milling. It again depends on the country. So there's a lot of evolution and a lot of efficiencies to be found across the board. What we've noticed with the milling business is that high growth that it enjoyed, those days are gone, and the growth that they're seeing is significantly slower. But it is a stable market, and there is stable consumption for the value that they bring.
Interesting. What countries are usually on your hit list? Because you give me a whole different perspective to what I'm used to. It's funny because most people I talk to, it's all about America and the US and the US market. And it's quite refreshing that, you seem to be thinking about other markets. It's almost like a global approach rather than just the US.
Absolutely. So in the last 1 year, we have some people who are doing some work for us out in Australia. So we've seen more than triple-digit growth in that region, in the Pacific region. Similarly, in Middle East, we opened shop to do business over there recently, and significant growth over there as well. Speaking the language matters. Europe and Southeast Asia as well. Like we got a team in Southeast Asia now in the last year, and we've even been ramping up on our European operations. So we kind of cast a wider net because we've noticed over the years that sometimes if we go too hard on some specific market and that market is no longer available for certain reasons, then all that effort done kind of bites the dust. So having learned from that, it's a method to defray some of the risks, but it's also a method to make products and solutions for a wider category of customers, which ensures that, let's say, a different product line for different customer groups in different countries.
Super interesting. And it's funny, it's going to be interesting to see, as we mentioned prior, which other companies start to exit dentistry. Do you think we'll see more and more of that?
Oh, definitely we will, because the thing is that the market is not as big as a lot of companies think it is, at least today. So maybe the total addressable market is significant, but to actually address that market, it's not about just building the product, it's the whole solution and the services that go behind it to get people up and running and actually using the systems. So a lot of the weaker companies are, not able to sustain numbers from the previous years. I don't think it's going to be easy for them because the pace of development, as you've seen this year, where every company let's say the top 5, the top 10 names, they've all had a release, whether it be SprintRay, Asiga, Formlabs, Shining, even we've had a bunch of releases. So everyone's coming out with something new. So keeping up with that pace on releases and then ensuring that they have the services to back it up, it's challenging.
Totally, man. And you mentioned your release, it was the Infinity nitrogen cure, isn't it? And for those who don't know, it's a nitrogen generator. I think it's unquestionable that nitrogen helps with curing. Again, for those who really don't know, after printing, you have a curing box, air, oxygen inhibition layer, same thing with your composites. And so a nitrogen curing system floods the chamber with nitrogen to push out all the air, and then you can cure. And one of the downsides was having these gigantic canisters of nitrogen. A lot of printing companies said they supported nitrogen printing, but having the canisters is honestly super annoying. It's a major pain point. I don't really like it. And now you've invented this thing where it takes nitrogen from the air. It's kind of crazy. Can you elaborate a bit on it?
So Nitrogen generators have been around outside the dental industry, more in engineering and other application fields. However, they've been huge. Like we're talking smallest one, maybe the size of a refrigerator or something, and most of them are size of a car. So pretty significant, and it was a years of work for us to like slim that down and make it into a consumer slash prosumer level of product that's easy to use, can be kept on your desk, and pretty much satisfy the performance requirements for the dental applications. Yeah, and key is price point, because there's a lot of like post processing solutions out there that are great, but if the post processing solution costs more than a printer,
Yeah.
then people just look at that as something wrong, even though there's a lot of technology behind it. So yeah, I would say that's the developments that we've seen in the market with the nitrogen generator, and we will keep improving that solution. We have a roadmap for it, and you will see more power out of that solution in the coming years.
That's super cool, man. It's nice that you brought something new to the market. I think a couple of other companies announced a nitrogen generator soon after. And it's for those who may have been following, it was something that was soft launch released and then kind of pulled back. You had to do something. Now it's officially released, right? Like people can go and buy this curing box with a nitrogen generator.
Absolutely, and we've been quiet to market it simply because the demand is far higher than the supply. So
Interesting.
it's
Congratulations.
really doing well, and I think it's down to the fact that because nobody else has this kind of solution, so other companies may have like a printer, they may not have a post cure, or they may have some sort of post cure, but it may not be for all the validated resins. So our post curing solution, the business volume is more than the printer business today.
Oh, that's crazy. I mean, for those who may not realize, it's totally open, right? Like it's not like I need the printer to run the curing box. You can use this curing box on with any printer with most resins. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's more than 200 resins that have been validated. All the settings are available at a button click, so the users don't need to think much and just choose their resin and they're off.
So with nitrogen curing, it's one of those things that we talked about post processing a lot, where I feel like it's not really talked about, it's not really explained. The education element isn't there. People just assume whatever they get in the box is going to work. Do you think nitrogen curing is the way forward for dental 3D printing? Because again, like some companies don't even have a cure. Some have a cure and don't talk about nitrogen curing at all. Some companies that have the nitrogen curing units, like Prime Print, like you, say you have to use this. It's the best thing. Others say we came up with this new solution. This beats nitrogen curing. Others, just say put it in glycerin. What's your thoughts? Is nitrogen curing the best hands down in all your testing compared to any other form of curing?
Yeah, I would like to believe so, because these four methods that somebody could use, either they don't do anything, which is just use a regular cure box LED or bulb. The second one is they go with a vacuum system. The third one is glycerin, and the fourth one is nitrogen. All of them work. The thing is that how well do they work and how user friendly is it for it to work? I see that with the nitrogen, it depends on the resins. So mainly we recommend the nitrogen generator or nitrogen as a function for users doing class 2 materials. And the primary benefits are in two application categories. One is for transparent, relatively transparent or translucent finishes on your splint or guide. And the second one would be on the restorative cases, both for aesthetic and for mechanical strength. So I see we've done enough testing to see that, okay, this has a tangible benefit because, we've been around over 10 years. And for the first 8, we didn't really like this idea of nitrogen. And then when we started like diving deep and seeing that, oh, okay, if the industry has to move forward, this will be required for the class 2s. For the class 1s and maybe for the non-bio applications is not so important. You may see that most of the 3D print companies currently in the market, they're not really catering to chairside. They're in the lab business. So be it your desktop health, Hey Gears is very heavy on lab. Even Nextent is very heavy on lab.
Sega?
So the Sega is quite heavy on the lab. So I would say it's not their first priority. And perhaps that's why they didn't look at these things. And the volume of users who are actually doing splints and restorative cases is significantly less compared to the models. So I think that there's some time before the adoption increases.
And can you explain for those who may not know? Class 1 and Class 2, you mentioned that those materials. Can you break it down for us?
Yeah, so class 1 materials are anything that's below 30 days in the mouth. So that would be your surgical guides, your tray, IBT. Yeah, I would say it's mainly these. And
Throwaway things, custom trays, all of that. The things you use on a day and throw it away.
Correct. And then the class 2, really simple. It's a splint, it's a denture, or it's a crown and bridge material. Or nowadays, you have something like a Rodent Titan or something from SprintRay with Onyx Tough. It's basically a crown and bridge with a different filler loading and different aesthetic. So those applications are class 2, and the class 2 applications, we believe, at least from our studies, that there is a benefit to use nitrogen.
Interesting. And what about all the other applications? We talked about restorative a lot. It's the hot topic. Everyone wants to talk about restorative printing. Do you see any advancements in splints? Do you see like models are models? I don't think it's that interesting. Splints, it's kind of been dominated by Keystone Splint Soft by Keystone Industries. Any advancements in those two things, models and splints?
Yes, definitely. I think that I noticed that DTAX came out with the splint, and it was so good that I thought that it was milled or it was processed with thermoforming. Like I was like, whoa, that came out of a printer. So I was amazed. So I think that in terms of optical properties, their splint is like really leading the pack. And there's a couple of other companies from Germany, like Procedure. They have all the certifications. The product line has a new technology called MSI, which prevents the biofilm formation on the splints.
Nice.
So it has the therapeutic value. And you may see some more companies coming out with materials that have therapeutic value in terms of fluoride release and with other material release over time.
That's pretty cool. So this stuff isn't going anywhere. It's just going to keep developing.
Pretty much, because a lot of the knowledge from the traditional analog dentistry is going to move towards digital in terms of application.
Super cool. Super exciting. I mean, good for anyone who's in the industry. Must be kind of scary for those who are not. Do you have any advice for those people? Like how do you jump on board when it's moving so fast?
It's tricky, honestly, because in North America 15 years ago there's 15,000 labs. Today it's less than 5.
Really? So, jeez.
Yeah, that hurts, right? And then the dental technician schools in Europe are closing down. So a lot of them are, that science, that old art is not as popular, let's say, as a course. So, and things are moving towards digital. So they're able to do a lot of caseload with a lot less people or leveraging technology. So I think the whole industry is about to change. And we are seeing those changes. It started with the lab, which was the most affected. And then in terms of the clinic, the clinic always controls the customer relationship in the end. So they're not going anywhere.
Please tell me I'm safe.
Of course.
For now.
Now, with the clinic, you'll always do well. And I know that as more technology comes into the clinic, the more patient footfall you have, the more case turnarounds could be done. And that leads to more revenue. So I see the whole efficiency of the industry changing a lot.
And do you see chairside dentistry really developing? Do you think it's going to be, Syracuse pushed it for so long. Syracuse pushed chairside dentistry for over 20, 30 years, I think. It's a bit embarrassing. I went to their anniversary. I think it was 40 years. I'm sorry, Dentsply Sirona. That's kind of hovered around 15, 20% on mature markets like the US. That's after many, many years of advertising and marketing and pushing it. Of course, now dentistry is a different beast. Do you think we're going to see more dentists doing things in-house thanks to 3D printing?
For sure, we're going to see more dentists doing more 3D printing and digital dentistry as a whole in-house. However, if that needs to happen, there's like 3 specific areas where we see that there's friction points for the dentist to really get in. The first one would be the whole user interface and the experience needs to be really easy, where there's almost no way they should have a failure. Like it's just using AI and automation where the complexity, the technical decisions are just taken out of the process. If that's there, then, if it was as easy as giving a print on a 2D printer and you are very confident that you're not going to have a color smudge or missing data on it, then you will use that technology. And it's not quite there yet, because I would say there's at least 10-15 decisions that a user needs to make to get one print correct. I think that's too many. And as long as those decision criteria reduce, you will see the adoption increase. The prices of 3D printers are no longer the challenge as they used to be. The other thing I would say is that as long as companies move like from scan to print with an application focus to solve a specific problem, that's going to do well. So, I wouldn't be surprised if other scanner companies, other milling companies, or other print companies start like bundling, cross-selling, private labeling, and putting a whole package together. I think it's a matter of time before they do that to complete the whole loop. So essentially at Ackuretta, because we believe that we're not just selling our customers products, we're ensuring that they're successful in their 3D print journey. We're empowering them with something called our Concierge service. And essentially with the Concierge service, we're extending the warranty on our printer from 1 year to 2 years. And during that 2 years, they're getting training, support, hand-holding, priority sessions with us one-on-one. So it's not like a group session. And they're able to learn about workflows. So this is not just, tell me how to use the product. How do I get started? What's my onboarding like? This is more like, okay, I want to do splints. Which software do I use? What do I need to click? How do I move from the CAD software to the CAM? How to use Alpha AI? How do you print? What do you do for post-processing? And if it's restoratives, it would be stain and glaze. And they're speaking to a dental expert. So people who have, background in dentistry. And there's a lot of learning resources, supporting materials in case they forget what they learned in the session. So they can review all this information with the learning portal that we have. And we're covering most of the important workflows, whether it's models, it's removable dies, it could be ortho models. We even cover restoratives, dentures, all on 4, surgical guide splints. So the whole hog. Essentially, we see that users have started using their systems a lot more after they've onboarded these services. And we've changed the print success rate from low 80s to high 90s on our printers because of this kind of service. And the thing is, at the end of the day, the clinician wants to do the least amount of work to get the result. And we are kind of empowering that ability for them to be able to register with the concierge, which is 4 easy steps on your phone. Doesn't take more than a couple of minutes to do so, and schedule an onboarding session. And Lee Culp is also donating some of his designs.
Super cool, man. That's amazing. And it's really interesting seeing every company, create their own special service for the dentist. I mean, clinicians are a lucky bunch, man, in this industry. So much is changing, so much is developing, and we have so many amazing services. You bring up a really good point about the points that a print can fail. And I don't think 3D printing is even close to I love that analogy you give of printing something on paper, which not a lot of people do anymore anyway. Do you remember the days we all had desktop printers? That's all died. But like, let's say in your dental office, everyone knows how to print. It's pretty easy. But with dental 3D printing, you're totally right. And I think that's another knowledge piece that's missing, and something that's kind of undersold about how many things can go wrong. And a lot of people have no idea what to do with this, failed prints.
Yeah, it's something that companies don't want to talk about because they want to make it seem easy. It's very relative because, people who are using printers and technology find that easy, but other users find that intimidating. So it's about building the technology for the lowest common denominator so that it's democratized and everybody can get on board. And there's still a lot of work to be done in automation to kind of get there for the Chairside part. I think Formlab, SprintRay, they've made a lot of developments with their releases this year, which attune to the user experience and error reduction in the process, or let's say dummy proofing the process as an overall. I see that that's pretty much where the industry needs to be at to get this kind of double-digit adoption, because a good benchmark is the scanner players. So in a market like America, 50% of the clinics own a scanner. And in other countries, it's still a double-digit number. It's not single-digit anymore. So they've seen that, exponential growth rate over the last 5 years. And when is printing going to get there? That's the next question. So when's that hockey stick growth going to turn up? And I think that before that turns up, these couple of things with automation, user experience, training, and application-based workflows need to be in place first. And whoever's got that whole loop, I think they're going to take a decent chunk of the business. That may be a player that's currently doing extremely well, or maybe a new company that's thrown their hat into the ring.
Beautifully said, man. And look, I really appreciate your time, Ayush. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but in the last minute or so, a future outlook, when you look out into 3D printing, well, let's say digital dentistry as a whole, what are some of the exciting things that you see? Maybe something that you guys are working on. We'll have to keep an eye on you for ideas, but if you could share some words about the future.
Well, 3D printing is a garbage in, garbage out industry. So I see that if somebody is able to get from the scanner to the printer using AI really quickly, then that's going to be a really big problem solved for the industry. Whatever someone's printing, whether it's restoratives or models. So I think that would be the biggest needle mover. And the second thing I would say is the whole system could be automated, where it's the user doesn't need to take too many decisions to do a print, and anybody who's maybe a dental office assistant, with basic technical ability is able to operate a system consistently. And that's down to the printer companies making the flow a lot simpler. And Dentsply has done well with that, Formlabs as well, SprintRay as well. So I do see that there's still more to be done on that front. So those two specific aspects, and more on a long-term basis, I would say it's the material science, because materials are challenging today, considering the long lead time, certification lead time. So if you want to get certified in most parts of the world with something new, it's at least 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
So it's extremely painful. So before the material gets done, if we're able to get the software, which is not limited by certification, or the equipment automation not limited by engineering ability today, those two would form the basis for all these new materials and applications that we would see in the next 5 years.
That's super cool, man. Super interesting as well. I don't think it's something that most dentists realize, the lag time that we're seeing products that may have been not even researched, but totally finished 2 or 3 years ago. And look, Ayush, I really appreciate your time, genuinely. I know you're a busy guy. Again, for anyone who missed it at the start, this is the CEO of Ackuretta. He's done a phenomenal job as one of the main players in chairside 3D printing, carving his own niche in the market. I just want to thank you, Ayush, so much for your time again. I really appreciate your insights. I always love our chats, and I wish we had more time, because you've got always some really juicy gossip about what's happening in the industry, but that'll be for our next episode.
I look forward to that now, Ahmad. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to contribute to the industry.
Well, look, Ayush, once again, a big thank you. A thank you for your time. A thank you for your knowledge and your insights. It's been a fantastic chat. And for those of you listening, thank you as well for your time. This has been another episode of Digital Dentistry Decoded, where we keep you in the know of all things digital dentistry. Please subscribe to us to keep up to date for our future episodes, where we keep talking to basically all the CEOs of all these amazing companies and get into their brains about what they're developing and where they see the market moving. Once again, a big thank you to you all. And that's another episode to conclude at Digital Dentistry Decoded. See you guys later.